Hey, everybody, welcome to Doctors Making a Difference. Today on the show, we have my good friend, Dr. Josh Brinkerhoff. I appreciate him taking the time to be with us today and talk a little bit about his experience as a physician and his experience with some international medicine. And I think it'll be a great interview, so I appreciate you being here. Josh, why don't you just maybe give us a little bit of an introduction on yourself. I told him you were a doctor and that you've done international medicine, but tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what made you choose medicine in the first place.
So, yeah, Dr. Joshua Brinkerhoff. I grew up in southern Utah, and I grew up in a town where there wasn't much by way of medical care available. We had a small clinic. We had a PA. We never had a physician there in the county where I grew up. But I remember as I grew up, just my different interactions with this PA that was there were just incredibly positive. An amazing man. He had been in the military and had been a medic in the military, and really served our community well. And when I got to medical school eventually, I remember thinking back on this PA that had served the community so well. And he had a tremendous influence on me. And what I decided to do eventually, I decided to go into family medicine because I wanted to be that kind of doctor that could serve the whole community, that could do a little bit of everything and work in rural areas that really needed care, really needed medicine. And so that's kind of a little bit of background on why I chose to do family medicine. As I got older, I really didn't think a lot about going into medicine until I got into college. And I loved everything. I loved the sciences, but I also loved working with people. For a good while, I was a computer science major, which I really enjoyed. But the thing I realized that I was missing was interaction with people when I was a computer science major. And so I had to sit down and take a good look about, at what I really wanted to do, because I missed those human interactions, and medicine just fit the bill. It has the sciences and it has interaction with people. And at that time, I kind of thought back on this PA that served the community so well. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to help people like that. And so that's kind of what made me go into medicine. And yeah, here I am.
That's awesome. No, I think as you talk to a lot of our people listening are medical students or residents or doctors in various stages of training or practice. And I think all of us can relate to that, this idea of using medicine to bring science right to the room where somebody is receiving that care. And when you have a great example of someone that does that for your own family as a kid, it's a great thing. So as you went along, sometimes people get a little bit tripped up in the details of actually getting medical education and going to medical school residency, and you see that it takes a lot of time and a lot of cost, which is why it's kind of a difficult thing to do. And I was curious, as you started off with that idea, how true did that remain as you started in your training process and in your first years of practice? Were you able to accomplish some of those things you set out to do?
Yeah, so I think so. As I went through medical school, I wanted to keep an open mind about the various areas of medicine, the various specialties. And I don't think I was completely committed to just going into family medicine. I wanted to see what I would really love. And as I went through each of the different areas of medicine during medical school, I kind of loved them all. And so that was my answer, right? Because family medicine does a little bit of all of those things. And so, then I pursued family medicine, and I pursued family medicine in such a way that I knew I could get the training I needed to go to a rural area, so that I could do obstetrics and ER and hospital medicine as well as clinic. And so I left residency feeling confident going to a situation like that. And I did. I went to a small town in Utah, and worked there for 9 years doing a little bit of everything. And it was great. But it was also tiring, right?
Right.
In the small community, there were initially just three of us, three physicians in the small community. So I was on call every third day.
Right.
And then eventually we got another partner that came in. And so I was on call every fourth day. And that felt amazing, you know.
It's all relative.
Right. Right. So yeah, it was very busy. It was a little bit hard on the family, but boy, I loved those years, and I loved the experiences that I had. Yeah, and then we can get into a little bit in the future of why I decided to continue to make a change. But yeah, it was incredible, and I did feel like I was able to work in those small communities and fulfill some of those needs. And I really enjoyed it.
Well, you know, it's kind of cool. Like you have, I think every physician, no matter what their specialty, receives broader training than they typically work in practice, depending on what it is. And the more generalized your training is, like if you're a family doctor, internist, general surgeon, you're going to be, or OBGYN, you're going to be really broadly trained. And then depending on what you actually do in your job, you know, you may or may not apply all elements of that. But it sounds like you did obstetrics, emergency room, inpatient, outpatient, I'm assuming nursing home. And so I always, people ask me about my job, which is similar to that. And I say, well, I get to do everything, but I have to do everything. You know, that's
right,
that's kind of the challenge, because you do get to do all those things. And on the other hand, when even if you're not on call, quote unquote, you still get to come in and help, because babies don't tend to come on days when you're on call, and your nursing home patients, the inpatients still need attention when you're not there. And then the ER will get into overload situations, and you know that you're not going to leave your colleague sitting there stranded with you know, a big huge pile up with 15 victims. You're going to drop what you're doing and go help. So you kind of are always on call a little bit, which is, it's kind of the downside of it, I suppose. But
yeah, well, absolutely.
And I think you know, a lot of people have that same thing. You grow up and you see this do everything sort of physician, but the reality is that it is hard, and yet at least the generation of physicians that preceded us, I think that was the standard in small towns, is you basically were expected to be available all the time. I talk to community members where I live, and that seems to be the expectation, is that they, even before the phones, they would just go get one of the doctors off the tractor. They'd send the police to go find him wherever he was, and he would come. And anyway, it's an interesting thing. My friend who works at the university told me, he said, yeah, you're like the last true doctor I know, which is really funny. No, but it is cool. Like, you got to practice this broad spectrum medicine with all the pros and the cons of that. And it's one of the beautiful things about being broadly trained. And you actually got to use all those skills that you acquired during your training, which is cool.
Yeah.
Well, so kind of, I guess, to that point, you got to do everything. And I know there are physicians who feel a little bit stressed / burned out, because they say, well, I have to do all this and there's no end in sight. I don't think I can do this till I'm 65 years old or 60 years old, because it seems like too much. But I think people feel guilty / obligated / indebted, whatever it is, and yet they are hesitant to make changes that they may need to, depending on which chapter of life they're in. So I was curious, you left that type of employment, but I'm curious how that change came about, and what did you go to? And I'd be interested in kind of this next chapter of life that's rolled out over the last 2 or 3 years here.
Absolutely. So yeah, it got to the point. I mean, certainly there were times where I thought about leaving, but at the same time, I loved the practice. I loved my partners, and so the way that we came to make the decision to leave was kind of interesting. I had always been interested in working in Alaska and living in Alaska. And my wife had always been less interested. I think when you talk about Alaska, most people have visions of tundra and polar bears, and I think that's what she was thinking. I was interested in any part of Alaska, but particularly in southeastern Alaska. And one day when I came home from work, my wife just had mentioned, "Hey, I was looking online on the AAFP website and noticed that there's an opening in Ketchikan, Alaska." And I was really surprised that she even brought it up, because she had earlier said, "I'm not really interested in living in Alaska. It's just too far away," and that type of thing. But when she said that, I said, Ketchikan is a part of Alaska where it's really not that cold. And we talked about it a little bit over the next few days. And after a while, I had contacted some of the doctors there, and they had said, just come up and interview. Even if you don't want to stay, it's great to have people come up and interview. And my wife said, let's just go up and interview. It'd be a fun trip up. And so we decided to go up, and we got there, and it was the middle of the winter. Well, I think it was November. And by November, most of the bears are kind of hibernating. Oh. But she had always said, or, kind of going to sleep anyway. And she had always said, I want to see a bear, but I want to see it in a car, so it's not scary, while we're in a car. Yeah. And while we were there, a bear ran across the road one night while we were driving around, just right in front of us. And she was so excited. She was like, "It's a sign. We're supposed to be here."
That's awesome.
No. So anyway, it ended up just going really well. She really enjoyed it. And so, we knew we had been thinking about making a change, mostly because of how busy life was for me. And so we thought, hey, this is it. This is the time to make a change. Our kids were still pretty young, and it just really seemed to be an opportunity to make that change. And of course, I was very nervous about what all of my patients would say and think when I said I was going to make a change.
Right.
That was one of my big fears. And I don't know if it would have been this way had we gone somewhere else, but I would tell people that I was leaving, and I could see the disappointment on their faces. And then I would say, we're going to Alaska, and all of a sudden their face would change, and they would say, "Oh, that's so exciting." So that helped me feel a little bit better. But anyway, that was kind of my experience with making a change. In going to Alaska, it was different, the situation. I knew I would be doing mostly outpatient medicine. I knew I would be giving up obstetrics and ER and all of those things. And so I had mixed feelings about that, but we ended up just feeling good about it. We went up to Alaska, and I was there practicing for 3 years. And yeah, I enjoyed it to some extent. It was working for a large corporation. Even when I was in the small Utah town, I was working for a large corporation. And one of the things that was the hardest about working in that small town was working for a larger corporation.
Right. You don't have the local control and autonomy that you might expect.
Right. Yeah. And there were always these mandates handed down that seemed to just not make sense, especially for a rural community. They were, and then there were these things that they would tell all the doctors that just didn't make sense. Anyway, it was difficult working for a large corporation. It felt like our voices weren't heard. It felt like the community needs weren't always met. But going to Alaska, I was also working for a large corporation, and I really had a hard time with that. I still felt like my voice wasn't heard. They really didn't care about me. Even I felt this way in Alaska more even than in Utah. I felt like they didn't care about me. I was just a number. They could care less about, kind of what I
Right.
was feeling, what I was doing, just as long as I made money. And it's interesting because both of these hospitals that I worked for, or corporations that I worked for, are nonprofit, right? And
Right.
and I think going into medicine, I was specifically looking for nonprofit organizations to work for because I felt like maybe they would be more ethical and um, you know yeah, just better to work for. And I think that maybe that's the case, but still, you know, money is the bottom line, and
Oh yeah. Well, they have to, and I think some of the
they have to survive. Yeah,
right, some of those things are not even necessarily controlled at their level. They're playing by the same rules that are passed down from insurance corporations and yada yada. And it's just
yeah,
it's
well,
challenging because you put a different set of motivators with insurance or with patients or with hospital leaders. And I think as physicians, the training is a lot more like mission directed, like get this done, get the right thing done for the patient, whatever it takes, day or night, sacrifice whatever it takes to make sure the outcome is that this person achieves what they need to for their health. And sometimes larger organizations don't often, they may not share that particular vision, or they're not caught up in the details like you are as a physician. And yet your job, the thing you've been trained for, is to advocate for patients. So if you feel powerless to do that, it's not a great place to be.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard other people
So
say the same thing, and I think there's kind of a national cry to say, hey, we want the ability to be trained up as experts and physicians to give people the advice in a complicated situation without having too many fingers, too many other people making those decisions for us, whether they be insurance or administration or local corporation or private equity or whatever it may be. But I think a lot of physicians find that same thing. And so it's interesting you went from one to the other. Alaska was certainly a change in scope, a change in location. And I was curious, eventually you ended up moving on from that. And I'm curious how that process happened and kind of what was going through your mind as you did that.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so after working for them for a while, um, a couple of things I realized. I realized still I didn't love the um, working for a large corporation. I didn't love overall some of the things about the American healthcare situation, um, and and yet I still wanted to practice medicine. I still wanted to have that relationship with patients. Um, you know, I felt like I couldn't do that if they were dictating how long I could spend with each patient. I felt like I couldn't really,
Right.
sit down and truly get to the heart of the matter with patients. It was in and out. I think a lot of us as physicians feel that way sometimes, just in and out. We only have so much time, and time is more important than the patient sometimes. Time and money are more important than the patients. Um, and so uh, I got to the point where I had gone to a few different areas in rural Alaska. So I was in Ketchikan for a while, but the corporation where I worked had another clinic elsewhere on another island, and I would go out there and help sometimes because that was even more rural, and I had the skill set where I could go out and feel comfortable on a remote island, taking care of patients that maybe were in emergency situations that required my skills that I had developed. And after doing that a couple of times, I thought, there are a lot of communities here in Alaska that are just like this one. I bet I could do this more. I bet I could go and do locums type of things
Right.
and really enjoy it. Um, Fortunately, we were in a financial situation where I didn't feel trapped. We had saved up money. My wife had a side business um, that she really just had fun with. She was doing it just for fun, but it was making enough money that we felt pretty secure. Um, and so, yeah, I decided to make a change to doing locums. And it was a scary thing. I talked to a few other doctors who had gone to locums, and each one of them were very cautious in giving me advice about switching to locums. Mostly because, yeah, they realized that it was a financial risk and they didn't want to get me into a bad situation. So they're like, it's not for everybody. One of these doctors hadn't worked with any locums companies ever before. He just kind of went out and did this all on his own. And so it was, in thinking about it, it was really scary. I think it was really scary for my wife as well. She knew I wasn't happy in that situation. But it's scary to think, hey, my income is going to be totally dependent upon whether or not I find these
right. And it turns into, instead of steady stream of income, it turns into possible just episodic income. So you have
Correct.
to sort of play your financial cards right.
Correct. But as I looked into it more, I talked to a few locums placement agencies. I came to realize more and more that the opportunities were huge. Or in other words, there are people needing locums all the time. And if you want to do locums, you pretty much, at least it seemed to me as I looked into it, you can schedule locums and stack them and have a very, very full schedule. But of course, then there's still the danger that even if you have a full schedule, they can cancel last minute, right? They can say, oh, never mind, our doctor decided to stay. And so then you have this 3-month period where you don't have anything scheduled. So that can still occur, but at least I felt, reassured knowing that the opportunity was out there, the need was out there. And because we were financially secure enough, I decided to kind of make that change. And one of the things that made it a little bit easy to make the change is I went to my employer at the time and I said, look, I'm changing to locums. And they said, well, we don't want you to go. Why don't you stay on as a per diem physician with us? And then it was like, oh, well, I didn't know that was an option, right? And so I could kind of even schedule with them. We could stay living in the same house for a while, and I could schedule some time with them as well. There was another clinic in town that was looking for someone, and I think they were looking a little bit more for a long-term kind of physician. I think most clinics are. But I told them, look, I'm just doing locums. I'd still love to help you out. And I ended up being able to work with them quite a bit. And I liked working for that small clinic a lot better than the big corporation. Yeah. So I ended up spending most of my time with them when I was in town. But we made the transition, and it was really kind of nice. I could work as much as I wanted. I could dictate my hours. And then I could pick the places that I liked the best after, working in several different places. And then I realized, if ever I do want to settle down again and be in a long-term position, I'm automatically in a lot better job-seeking position. True. Because it's like each place that I go and work, it's like an extended interview. In medicine, traditionally we go to these sites and we do a 1 to 3 day interview with people. We don't get to practice any medicine while we're there. We get brief episodes of seeing who we're going to be working with, and then we sign on to these 1 to 3 year contracts after that brief experience.
Right.
But as a locums physician, you can work there for a month to 3 months and say, I hate this place, or this is amazing. I really like the way that they do business here, and I like the way that they interact with patients, and I like my colleagues. So I've really enjoyed that as well about locums, is I feel like they get to interview me on an extended basis. True. But I get to interview them. And so that has been fun. And so those are some of the benefits. I also like being able to feel or get a sense of how medicine is practiced in different areas, and in different corporations. And Peter, there was I'm going to go back a little bit because we had talked about me making a little bit of a change, but I left a large part of the story out
Yeah.
because um, because while I was thinking of making that change, you had reached out to me as well.
Right. I was
And
going to
and
bring this
and
up because
so
like Josh saved
yeah.
my bacon.
Well, it was so just to go back a little bit. Peter and I have known each other for a long time. We've known each other since undergraduate,
Right. Long time.
college. Um, we we met while we were working. We were trying to get experience in the field of medicine. We were both pre-med, and you were working in physical therapy at a rest home, and I was working in occupational therapy. And so we were just across the hall from each other, but we both learned that we were applying to medical school at the same time.
Right.
We both got into the same medical school, and so we knew each other through medical school. We were really good friends, and we ended up getting placed in the same residency. We had
Yeah. That was
very
pretty
similar
cool. Got
interests.
matched at the same place and had a lot of similar
Right,
experiences. Pretty cool.
right. So our friendship goes back a long time. And while I was kind of making a little bit of that transition to do more locums, Peter reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I have a partner that's leaving, and we're looking for someone, but even if you can't come long term, can you come and help out for a while?" And I had been thinking about doing locums, and hearing that I had the opportunity to go and work with Peter for a while, that helped me make that
Yeah. And it,
transition and that
well, and it was
decision
fun.
more.
That's awesome. Well, just to speak on the other side of that, this website podcast, I've been pretty transparent that I had a big tumor and had to go through all this medical experience. And so one of my biggest concerns during that time was my patients, because we're like what you described, a small town. One of my practice partners had left, and there would be no doctor in my clinic at all. And it takes a long time to hire a doctor, especially in a rural area. And so it would have left my patients with no doctor. And there were a couple of others in the town, but they were quite full. It just was left us in kind of a pinch. And so you could reach out to, locums agencies or other people and try to find staffing. But it was like this ready-made answer. It felt like just this gift from heaven. And because I reached out to Josh and a couple of other friends, and Josh and one of our other friends both said, "Hey, if you need help, we can come." And it was pretty cool. So they both lived at the time. Josh was living in Alaska. My other friend was living in Virginia at the time. So both far away from where I practice in Idaho. But because they had played their cards right, I suppose, financially, and had been able to be a little bit more flexible on their schedules, when a need arose, they were able to answer that call and spent several weeks taking care of my practice. And I had full confidence. I just knew I had full confidence that you would be able just to jump in and do my practice because I knew you were trained in the same setting. So on the receiving end of locums, rather than just looking at it as a job that is beneficial to you, for a small community, people still talk about the experience with Dr. Brinkerhoff and want to know how he's doing, and that I'm still refilling medications that were started by you. And it's made a tremendous difference to many individual patients, made a difference to the small hospital system where I work, and it made a big difference to me. So those who participate in locums, it's not just about the job, it's also about the people you're serving. And I think that's actually, you've kind of highlighted that no matter where you go, you have this opportunity to really interact with patients and help them with your skill set. And it doesn't mean you have to be constrained to just exactly one job, one employer forever. You may move around a little bit, kind of depending on what chapter of your life you're in. And I just think it's awesome, Josh. Like that, having watched you go through that transition, it's pretty cool that instead of choosing just like burnout and cut back and leave medicine, you've been able to kind of morph it into that's something that allows your interest to be explored, and you can kind of experiment with different schedules and different locations, and maybe you'll eventually find something that's more of a permanent thing. Maybe you won't. It'll just depend on what you like.
Right, right. And yeah. And the other thing is I was really looking at locums placement agencies at that time. And when I had the opportunity to come and work with you and several other opportunities kind of arose, I realized, hey, I don't know that I want to go the locums agency route, but everyone that I talked to had said, start with the agencies so you can get a feel for locums, and then you can do it on your own once you know how to do it. So I felt kind of fortunate. I feel like the locums agencies do a great job. But like I got one of their contracts and it was really like oppressive. And I thought, whoa, this is really weird. Like you give us everything, but we don't take any risk. You know what? You
Right.
take all the risk with
Right.
everything. And yet you have to answer our calls or else you're in breach of contract. So I think you have to be really careful because the locums agencies can be a little bit like those big other healthcare agencies that I had worked for. And I just got that taste as I was looking at those agencies.
Right. You don't want to
And
be an
so
asset to be managed. You're a physician.
right,
You're there to help
right,
patients, not just to be a pawn on somebody's playing board.
exactly. And so anyway, when these other opportunities arose, I thought, whoa, maybe I don't even need to go through these agencies initially. And so I started to do these locums, without going through any agency. So I actually have not ever had an experience going through a locums agency. I know that may be unique for a locums physician, but yeah, I think it's been great, and it can be done, certainly.
Yeah.
For those that are interested in doing locums, you can do it on your own, but you can also go through the agencies. Just be careful always about what kind of things you sign. Don't sign away your rights.
Right. Well, and it's like anything. You want to make sure that people making those decisions have the same motivations you do. Patient care. You want to make sure that you're taken care of financially, but that it facilitates you doing your job, and not having to do all the
Right.
other stuff. But
Right.
well,
And one other thing I was going to say about these contracts, I kind of got the impression initially when I was looking at locums agencies that, hey, in order for us to even look for jobs for you, you better sign this contract. That is not the case. So anyone that's interested in looking and doing locums, you do not have to sign any contract. They will keep looking for you because they want you.
right.
And so the first impression I got was, hey, sign this contract and we'll keep looking for jobs. Do not sign a contract for them to look for a job. Never sign a contract until you have the job, until you have a placement,
Good point.
because you're just signing away a lot of your rights by doing that. So
No, that's good advice. I think, Josh, everybody is going to be interested in how in the world you ended up in New Zealand. Like, I think this is
yeah.
a really fascinating part of the story because we're having this interview. You're 18 hours ahead of me tomorrow morning, and I want to kind of hear that. That's a fascinating locums assignment, but it's I think a lot of people have read about New Zealand and have seen opportunities come across their desk, but you actually did it. So tell us a little bit about. You're actually there right now practicing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So once I got into locums a little bit, my wife also knew that I had always had some interest in working internationally, and New Zealand and Australia are two areas that I had looked at. And so, yeah, we really started to look into those things more. I remember going to several conferences through the American Academy of Family Physicians, and at those conferences, just talking with recruitment agencies for various places like New Zealand or Australia. And so I looked up some of those agencies, and these are the agency that I looked up here was a government agency. It's called New Zealand Locums, and it's really just the agency that is hired by the government to help people get placed. So it's not like a locums agency where you're signing a contract and they get part of the cut. This is just a government agency that gets government funding to try to recruit physicians to come to New Zealand.
Right.
And so if you go through other locums agencies, they will do a lot of footwork for you. But this agency just basically guides you, and you still have to do all the footwork. You still have to apply for the visas and apply for, Medical Council of New Zealand membership. And it was a lot of paperwork. It was a lot of headache, but I just felt good about it. I kept going through all the red tape and decided to come here to New Zealand. My wife was supportive, and she said, "We'll bring the family down at least for part of the time and see what it's like." And so, yeah, it was really fun to have that freedom to go elsewhere. Now, part of my interest in going elsewhere is to see how another country does healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. To see here in New Zealand, there is a private healthcare system, but there's also a public healthcare system. So I think a lot of countries are like that. I thought it would be really interesting to see how a country does a public healthcare system. You hear pros and you hear cons about that
right.
all the time. We have neighbors to the north that have that type of system,
right.
and you talk to different people, and some people love it and some people really don't love it. But I thought, it'd be interesting to just see how another country does healthcare, and because I know the American healthcare system has its problems, and everywhere has its problems. But I just felt like it would be a good experience to really see how another country does healthcare and what works, and hopefully learn from my experience about what does work and what doesn't work in healthcare.
Yeah. So what have you thought? I mean, you've been there. You've practiced in rural medicine. You've been in rural Alaska. You've kind of been able to do lots of things. I'm curious, what are your impressions about New Zealand, their healthcare system? What's your scope of practice or your schedule?
Yeah. So right now I'm working 4 days a week. I'm doing outpatient and ER here. And it's been really fun. I feel like, and it could be just where I'm working. I feel like the physicians here are a little bit happier, maybe. I feel like they're a little more content with their jobs, but a lot of them now, there are two sets of physicians that are working where I work. There are the physicians that are more of the employed physicians, and then there are the physicians that actually own the practice.
Okay.
And I think the physicians that own the practice are trying to recruit more people to buy into the practice. But of course that means more responsibility. And so a lot of the
right.
physicians are like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want a paycheck. I just want to work my hours. And so those are the two different types of physicians that are working here. And, I feel like certainly I can see a little bit of a heavier, weight of responsibility on those that own the practice. They generally are staying a little bit later to complete everything through the day. The ones that are just employed pretty much walk out right at 5, you know what I mean? Or right at the end of their shift.
It does sound nice.
Yeah, which is kind of nice. So you can kind of choose, do I want more responsibility? Probably for better pay type of thing, versus just have that, 8-hour work day and then I'm finished. That's all. And yet some of the physicians that do own the practice, though they have the long days, may only be working 2 days a week. Right. So there's still a mix of that as well. But the public healthcare system here, it is interesting. It's really, really cool. Like here in New Zealand, everyone is covered for any accident. So me as a visitor to the country, if I were to break a bone, that would be totally covered.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Because if it was some type of accidental injury, that's totally covered. So that's one aspect of their healthcare. any accidents are covered. And so that's really cool. It gives people a real sense of security, I think. Um, there are other social kind of benefits that are available for patients who can't work for various reasons. And I do think, just as with any kind of social benefit that governments give out, there is a lot of abuse of that, maybe overuse of it sometimes. So yeah, it's interesting. I knew there would be pros and cons to the various healthcare
Right.
systems and approaches. I do see a lot of the social benefits maybe being overused or abused, or it's just hard to police those types of things, so I can see how a lot of money is maybe wasted on things. I do see some people really trying to get on social benefits and staying on social benefits long term that really would benefit from just getting into the workforce. You know what I mean?
Right.
But at the same time, I do feel that their unemployment type of benefits here, they do set the compensation for those low enough that most people feel like, hey, I can do way better working than just getting on a social benefit. You know what I mean? So there is that motivation. I think when you have a social benefit that you earn more not working than working, then you're in trouble, right? Because
Right.
you're going to
Yeah.
have a lot of
Wrong
people.
motivation. Right.
Right. So, but anyway, it's been interesting to see. And then, of course, the public healthcare system can be a little bit frustrating. You see people who in the States, you would do a specific thing, you do a specific procedure, you do a specific test, and you send in for that test, and they say, no, this doesn't qualify, and you think, what do you mean it doesn't qualify? So there are headaches like that. But I do feel like overall, people get good health care. So the life expectancy of New Zealanders is, I think, 6 years higher than the life expectancy of U.S. citizens.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
It is interesting. And part of that could just be genetics, right? But we have Pacific Islander population, the Maori population here, who have high rates of diabetes, high rates of, hypertension, those types of things. And so I don't know that I feel like it's totally genetic. I think that there are people here who have genetic predispositions to things that a lot of us in the States would have,
Right. Right.
So I do think that part of it is the way that they approach healthcare and treat their patients well overall. And so it has been good to see that. I feel like the anxiety over healthcare and the cost of healthcare is non-existent.
Yeah. Well, and that becomes a barrier for lots of people.
Yeah. I feel like in the States, even as a physician who I practice medicine and I can take care of my family for most things, and yet we sometimes feel huge anxiety about going to the dentist or because we don't know how much it's going to cost. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I can see how people avoid healthcare because of fear of cost. And I see people all around me in the States who are in incredible debt from simple healthcare type of things. And that's disheartening.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
here
interesting.
I can't. Yeah. So here I just don't see that. I don't see anybody really, really scared about their health care, whether they'll be able to pay for health care. And so that's kind of fun. It's nice to not have to see that, and not everybody gets all the procedures or things that they need or want. So that's a little bit of a downside, but at the same time, the overall financial anxiety and hardship is almost non-existent.
Yeah. Well, what a fascinating experience! Like your ability to do locums and travel and do all this stuff, and you've seen practice in you've seen medical care in multiple settings now in another country. I mean, it's just awesome. I want to
Yeah,
spend the
yeah,
last little bit talking about these decisions that allowed you to make that, like to come and help me when I was sick, the ability to travel and do locums assignments or take the potential risk that comes with it, or even travel overseas and do this experience in New Zealand. And everywhere you've gone, you've been able to find patients in need who've been able to receive health care that you've been able to provide because of your training and experience. But I part of the purpose of this endeavor with Doctors Making a Difference is to make sure that we don't fall into the financial traps that make people constrained, that they can't make changes. They say, I've got the golden handcuffs, I have the huge house that I can't afford, or I'm so indebted from school and I have no way to pay, and now I have to stay at this job because I have to stay here, because if I don't, then I have too much uncertainty and I leave my family in a lurch. And so I'd be curious to see if you have any advice for people who are in training or in practice for how to manage student debt or how to save so you can have, you said financial security, another word for it is financial independence. How can people get that so that instead of waiting until their 60s, by the time someone's in their 40s, they could say, I want these out of medicine. I'm the doctor. I made the decisions to do this. I'm the one with the information. I won't be managed by somebody else without a medical degree. You don't have that ability to say that unless you have some financial independence. And I'm curious what advice you would give to people to achieve that, because that's a beautiful thing to have.
yeah. Well, thank you. I feel really blessed to have that opportunity. But it is true. I think that a lot of it is planning ahead and the way that you live. I think that many people are maybe familiar with or have at least heard of the FIRE movement.
Right.
FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early movement. And I've heard several people who are big into the FIRE movement talk, and they say that they don't really like that, the last part of that, where it's financial independence and then retire early, because a lot of people in the FIRE movement say it's not that we want to retire early, it's that we want to be employment independent early, right? It's not like I want to quit working. It's not like I want to quit contributing to society early. It's that I want to be able to call the shots earlier
Right.
in my life than waiting all the way until age 65, and then I'm old enough that maybe I can't even get on anywhere else. I can't maybe get hired elsewhere. Yeah, it's just that not waiting until that magic age of 65 before you can really say, here's what I want to do.
Right.
And I still want to contribute. I still want to work, but I want to do it on my terms. And I want to do it in such a way that I'm not making money for someone else or having to do what other people tell me.
Right.
And so I remember in medical school, it was really interesting because there were a lot of people in medical school. Those of you who are in medical school can probably relate to this. A lot of people in medical school that during medical school tried to live like a doctor. And what I mean when I say that is they would live in really nice apartments, really nice houses. They would get the cars. In medical school, you can draw upon just all kinds of debt.
That's true.
You know what I mean? It's like people are looking for you saying, here, take this loan. And even as a physician, right after medical school, you have financial institutions and mailings coming to you saying, here's $30,000 and here's, the interest rate to repay. People are always trying to get you into debt. And in medical school, don't live like a doctor, live like a student. You know what I mean? After medical school, live well below your means. And if you can do that, if you can say, hey, this is my salary, I can comfortably live on half or less of that salary. If you can live on 25% of your salary, great. And just keep putting away that savings. You can feel very financially independent. And then you can,
Right.
do what you want after that. Then you can, you have that freedom, I think, to be able to make decisions that seem really scary, like leaving a regular job. But if you have the cushion, then it's okay. It's a lot easier to walk a tightrope with the trampoline underneath you.
That's a good one. That's a great way to put it. Walk with a trampoline under you. And I would say, just to reflect on just what you said, if you live on less than you make and always put something aside so that compound interest is working for you instead of against you. And then the other one that I think is underrepresented sometimes is medical school costs a lot, but there are so many loan repayment programs. And it doesn't hurt to go live in a place where you have access to one of those, or work for a nonprofit, take advantage of public service loan forgiveness, or take, I received payback from the health, because I worked in a health profession shortage area, and lots of people work in rural areas, underserved areas, and those areas of the country really need the help. And what's wrong with putting 4 or 5, 6 years of work in there, and then you are kind of back to broke. You've paid off the loans, they're gone, and then you're financially free. And so I would encourage people to prioritize staying out of debt, and if you, in your medical school debt, some of those necessary debts, take advantage of those programs, because your colleagues are taking advantage of them. And if you do it while you're in your 30s, you're advantaged for years to come, because that money that you do have the ability to set aside that you might have spent on student loans can now be set aside to let it grow toward some financial security, so that you're not controlled. I think it's so powerful what you said. Walk so you have a trampoline. Walking the tightrope is easier. I thought that was beautiful. And then don't be controlled. If you need to change gears and move because you're in a different chapter of life, or you want to just explore something else because it sounds interesting, do it. You're one of the most educated people in our modern era, having had a privilege of becoming a physician. And it would be a shame to have people retire because of a burnt out, broken system. It's better to say, well, I'll use my skill set in a way that's still satisfying to me. And I think it's an awesome example. A lot of people talk about it, but you've actually done it. And I think it's so cool, Josh.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And just to go along with what you said, I think, all of those things are really good advice. And then remember the power of passive income, right? There are so many ways to earn passive income. So you can look at your job as your main source of income, or you can look at your job as a way to get involved in passive income. And passive income can be as simple as putting money in the stock market, or in a high interest savings account. Even you can get so much passive income. And if you have the goal of getting a financial nest egg to the point where you can live off of just that passive income, just that interest, or just that rent from apartments that you've bought, or whatever it is, if you can get to the point where you can use passive income, then you're really free to do what you want to do. And we've talked a little bit about burnout, how there's so much burnout in medicine, and it's true, there is. But I think that getting back to why we went into medicine, I think most of us went into medicine not for financials, although it's true. A lot of people look at medicine and they think, hey, it's a nice, financially secure place to be. And there is some truth in that, but that's not what brings us joy in medicine, I don't think. I think that most of us go into medicine because we want to help people, and helping people is, at least for me, what brings me joy. It's not necessarily the money that I make. The money that I make, there's always that temptation to follow the money, but follow the joy, I think, is really important. Get financially independent so that you can follow the joy.
That's great.
Do what really makes you feel fulfilled and helps patients. I've always, in recent years, it's been kind of interesting because I have seen the erosion of trust in mainstream medicine, and it's alarming to me. And that's, I think, all over the world. And I can't help but ask myself, why is there such an erosion in trust for mainstream medicine amongst the public? And I think it's because, there are probably many different reasons, and I think we all need to ask ourselves this question. Why are people not trusting us as much? But I think it's partly because we don't spend enough time with patients. Patients don't feel cared for, even if we're giving them way better care than the person down the street that doesn't have a medical license but pretends to practice medicine.
Right.
People leave their offices sometimes feeling way more cared for, even though they're not getting evidence-based care or good care.
Right.
And I think it's because right now in mainstream medicine, we're following the money, not following what brings us joy. And that's really, truly helping people, spending time with people, all those types of things. If you can become financially independent, then you can really spend
right.
time caring for people.
That's
rather
awesome.
than just getting through the day.
Well, no, and that's one of the missions of this Doctors Making a Difference. The kind of the big message to get out is you have the power to make those changes, and it really is all about the patient and the care. That's why you became a doctor. You'll be financially secure if you save your money and are careful with it. But I like what you said, follow the joy. And I think the other message that's come through pretty clear is that you can make your life so that you are not controlled by others. And that the thing that matters the most is your interaction with patients. How am I taking care of them? And when somebody rolls out a policy or something that just doesn't make sense and they want to constrain you to do something that really isn't best for patient care, if you have a little bit of financial security, a little bit of that trampoline, you can say, no, we're not doing that. And if the consequence is that you don't work in that organization anymore, well, that's okay. You don't want to have that be the case. You hate to have it come to the brink of, either I'm doing this or not working here. But on the other hand, you're the physician. You're the one whose license is there. You're the one who has the liability for what happens. And you're also the one who went into this to become a physician, not just to follow an algorithm or to punch a clock or to make somebody else rich. So I think it's just such a powerful message. And you've shared a lot of wisdom with us today, Josh. I really appreciate it. Do you have
thanks for having me.
Oh yeah. Any parting thoughts for our group? I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This has been a fantastic episode to record with you.
No, I appreciate you talking with me, and it's always good to see you and talk with you, even if it's across the world.
That's right. Well, thanks so much, Josh. We'll sign off here, and again, thanks for listening to Doctors Making a Difference.